In the description box, you'll find a link to a blog titled Why Cosplay Girls Annoy the Shit Out of Me. Classy title, I know. I'm going to include most of it in this review, only paraphrasing parts that are long-winded and or repetitive. I'm addressing this blog for multiple reasons. One, because the woman I love is a fan of cosplay. The article is also riddled with erroneous and fallacious accusations against the general female cosplay populace, and these offenses extend towards female nerds, gamers, etc., who I find also receive a bad rap. Furthermore, the comments in the blog section are not exclusively against what this person is saying, and quite a few are actually in support of it, meaning that this isn't just one person who holds this opinion. There are quite a few, so I feel there's some value in addressing them. Some brief background for those of you who are unfamiliar. Cosplay is when people dress up as fictional characters or even real celebrities from entertainment mediums they enjoy, such as cartoons, movies, comics, and TV shows. It's done in the same playful spirit as dressing up for Halloween. It usually happens at conventions, and this person has a problem with the women who participate. So let's get into what the author of the Zachary by Ron Helm blog has to say. I am a science fiction fan, and I mean that in the I know who Theodore Sturgeon, Robert Sheckley, Frederick Pohl, and a whole bunch of other people you have no idea are because you think watching 6 seasons of Lost made you a hardcore sci-fi fan. And you think I would be all about hot chicks picking up on my interests, but I'm not. Why? Because these girls, as a general rule, suck. The author has begun by condescending to his audience and placing himself on the pedestal of science fiction fandom. In doing so, he's laid the groundwork for his most egregious error, which is making fandom some objective status with measurable criteria to meet. It's not. I've been a Detroit Pistons fan my entire life, but I've only ever been to one of their games. Does that mean the season ticket holder has the reason to malign me for considering myself a fan of the team? There is no objective measurement for these things, so you don't get to arbitrarily assign how much of a fan someone is by comparing the level of interest and knowledge of other people to yourself. Now, let's hear you prove why these girls, as a general rule, suck. The first thing about cosplay girls is their average age is 11 to 17 years old. Now, I don't have a law degree by any means, but I'm pretty sure that even seeing a girl who is 14 and thinks a public appropriate outfit is one where there is a patch of fur covering her butt crack and 2 pieces of tape modestly concealing the part of the nipple that sticks out but leaving the areola mostly exposed is grounds for a sex offense if you're looking at it over the age of 18. And this is why some guys now have to go door to door and say hello to their new neighbors when they move into a new neighborhood. First of all, no. You don't get on a sex offender list for attending an anime convention where some girl is lewdly dressed. You go on to compare strippers and child pornography and drawing a parallel to how these things are not okay and therefore such cosplay shouldn't be okay. Now, you've already failed to match your thesis. You're not complaining about cosplay here or female cosplayers. You're complaining about parenting and social standards of decency. If an 11-year-old girl is allowed to go to a convention unsupervised wearing something which exposes 99% of her body, then your anger at cosplay girls is misplaced. And while I haven't been to such a convention where any girl that matches that description exists, I'll take your word for it and say that yes, it happens. And if it does, you should probably report your discomfort to the people running the convention, who are responsible for enforcing indecent exposure laws just like any other convention host would be. Oh, or you could just look away. Regardless, making up the figure that most of these girls are 11 to 17 doesn't hold any merit in your generalized anger against all women who enjoy cosplay. Also, cosplay girls, I have to bust your nuts on another thing. What you are doing is not costuming. Costumes are things that completely transform a person into an unrecognizable form or a fantasy. They are things that require long periods of time and skill to create. Your work generally requires a wig from eBay and some eighth of a yard snippet from a scrap bin at Joann Fabrics. Think I'm full of shit and don't know what I'm talking about? Let me ask you this, and answer honestly. What was the last costume you had that did not require a wig, used more than a yard of fabric, and covered your midriff? Yeah, I thought so. Just like you don't get to make up and enforce your own standard of what makes someone a fan of something, you don't get to do that with the word costume either. A costume could be as simple as wearing clothes that represent a different time period or geographical region, or it could be as complex as wearing head-to-toe rubber suits or intricate body paint. No official definition of costume is as rigid or extreme as yours, which you fabricated out of thin air to support your own argument. You've also committed a hasty generalization fallacy by assuming that most girls who do cosplay have costumes consisting of a yard or less of fabric and a wig. And wigs are pretty typical parts of costumes, just like masks are, so I'm not even sure what your problem is with women wearing them as part of a costume. Rebecca Romaine Stamos wears less than a yard of fabric when she's covered in body paint and playing Mystique in the X-Men movies. Is she not in costume to you either? If a man puts on a mawashi and does his hair like a sumo wrestler, is he not technically in costume either? See how your personal definition of costume is kind of bullshit? It also bugs me that I see a lot of these people in general being hailed as creative. Replicating something someone else has created is not creative. Creativity is making something new that, while it may have been influenced by other works, is largely an original idea executed in a new or interesting fashion. Being the 1 millionth slave Leia isn't creative. It just means you're nominally good at emulating. That's really the highest praise you deserve. You're an okay copy artist. Congratulations at tracing the lines, asshat. You did it again. You made up your own definition of creativity just to say what these women are doing isn't creative because you don't like them and what they're doing doesn't fit your standard. How do you not see the absurdity of that? Creativity is the adjective form of to create. While not all cosplayers claim to be creative, your own statement says a lot of them are hailed as such, and a lot of them are. If any one part of their outfit had to be modified or manufactured on their own, then they were being creative to some extent. Even if they are creating something to look like someone else's invented character, that doesn't matter. Your expectation for them to manifest their own outfits out of nothingness to create an original character before they can be called or considered creative is unrealistic. As Carl Sagan said, if you wish to make your cosplay from scratch, you must first buy some shit at the fabric store. See, you're not really even playing or pretending at costuming. Your efforts are so weak that they couldn't even be considered valid for costuming. What you're actually playing at is whoring. I'm not saying you are whores, I'm saying you're doing a fantastic job of playing them. You're kind of failing in two highly disparate yet somehow connected areas, namely costuming and slutting around. You're failing at costuming because your craftsmanship is for shit and does not exemplify a concerted effort into the field, and you're failing at being sluts because you just look like one, but you're not actually ponying up the good/effort in that area either. It's remarkable how general you're being here. You've accused the majority of these women of having poor craftsmanship, which you've inaccurately assumed is a requisite for costuming. If I put on a costume that I buy from a store and craft 0% of it myself, am I not costuming? Am I not in costume? You've simultaneously accused those same women of attempting to be sluts and assume that they don't follow through on their sexual flaunting. Well, a woman showing off her body doesn't mean that she's a slut, nor does it mean she's under even a shred of obligation to have sex with any of the men who've granted her their attention. Also, if a woman dresses up as a sexually attractive version of something or someone, and she and the man are both interested in that particular field, she attracts a man and has sex with him, that doesn't make her a slut either. It makes her a human with sexual desires that she has a right to consensually act upon on her own terms, not yours. I realize I'm being harsh here, but don't take it too personally. You're in the right age group for this. When you live at home, no one really expects a lot from you, so half-assing everything is okay. We're not looking at any of you and expecting anything great, so if the best thing you can provide the world at this point is some prepubescent spank bank deposits, fine. Just do us all a favor and make up for it by doing something worthwhile later in life, like curing cancer, teaching the next Helen Keller to talk, or being at least nominally less worthless than you are now. Unless, of course, you're in your late 20s and still doing this, in which case, God help you. You're in for a hard landing when reality sets in and you realize what a continental dollar male attention really is. Who the fuck do you think you are? What have you done that meets your own standard for being not worthless? You've assumed that females doing this are an immature age, then insulted them for doing something you consider immature. Then you've insulted the older women who do this as if you can't fathom the idea of somebody having a harmlessly fun hobby, which is tantamount to the kind of fun adults have every year when they dress up for a Halloween party, or Mardi Gras, or other themed occasions. Now look, I'm not against skanky outfits. I generally think you can judge how fucked a society is by how against girls in sexy outfits it is. I think that's why the Middle East is in such a mess, because they don't embrace the awesomeness that is baby doll t-shirts. But there's an appropriate context here. I'm not a Puritan. I'm about the least sexually uptight person on the planet. But I restrict my appreciation to that of girls who are legal age, which is more than I can say for most convention attendees. You go on to point out that older men clamor around these girls taking pictures of them and assume it's strictly masturbation material for them later. Then you claim to do female photography, which must be on par with curing cancer based on your own previously mentioned standard of not being worthless, but that you're able to restrain yourself from looking pathetic and desperate when you see a hot woman with a camera in your hand. It's 3 solid paragraphs of you blaming cosplay women for how some men react to them. A man's reaction to a woman being attractive is not the woman's fault. And from what I've seen, most women handle those gawking men rather gracefully. If they were incapable of doing so, they'd probably dress more modestly, which, by the way, plenty of cosplay women also do. I've seen some brilliantly done, handcrafted costumes by women that cover their entire bodies. That doesn't mean they're the only ones doing cosplay right. Not that they'd have sex with you anyways, which, by the way, isn't a word. They wouldn't know what to do with a live penis. I have not personally had sex with a cosplay girl, but I have friends in the age group who have, and the general consensus is that girls respond to a cock in their hands in roughly the same fashion they would if you were to hand them the throttle stick on a MiG jet rocketing towards the ground and order them to pull it out of active tailspin, namely, confusion bordering on terror. This has to be the real gem of your article. You've taken your asinine assumptions to the next level in a way that so many sexually frustrated males tend to do. You've admitted that none of these women have had sex with you. And based on hearsay from your friends, you've accused most of them of being sexually unwilling and incompetent. Well, first, which is it? You say they wouldn't have sex, then you deliver testimony from your friends that the ones they hooked up with weren't good at giving handjobs. Secondly, if you haven't figured out to not trust your male friends about the stories of their sexual conquests, then you're about as naive as they come. You go on to whine about how unrealistic the fake swords are that men and women carry at these conventions, as if you don't realize that they're matching the equally exaggerated weapon sizes found in the shows and comic books being emulated. It's not real. It's a fantasy. It's fiction. And this is a strange little piece that's off topic, and I'm not sure why you even included it here. The other problem is these girls don't just stick to the anime conventions. Nope. They have started invading sci-fi conventions as well. I know most of your 64 points of IQ went into deciding what blue wig you needed to wear so you could properly represent the image of some bullshit character, but anime and sci-fi are not the same things, dumbass. I find it ironic that you call people a dumbass in the same sentence that you failed to include a comma properly. You also went on to ramble more vitriolically on that same point. In irony, thy name is you. Sci-fi is a genre of theme, while anime is a genre of medium. In order to be an anime, something need only be Japanese animation. Animes span over a wide variety of thematic genres, including, but not limited to, action, horror, children's stories, westerns, and yes, sci-fi. Furthermore, as long as they're having fun, who cares? You can find comics at booths and anime conventions that expand beyond the realms of anime, and the same can be said for sci-fi conventions. It's supposed to be fun, and I've never heard of people being so offended by someone not dressing to their standard of a convention theme or a party theme until reading this blog post of yours. When I first started going to the local Starfest sci-fi conventions, there was only one basic category of attendees. Shitty-looking 30 to 45-year-old men with pot bellies who lived their off hours outside of being ardent coders by sleeping on the parent pillow. I rested comfortably knowing that if I were to go to a convention, I would be surrounded by fat fucktards who smelled like bad butter and who would be wearing Klingon foreheads and giant oversized glasses from lens crafters that went out in style in 1982. I honestly don't understand why you're raging about having attractive women who want to dress provocatively attending these conventions and longing for the good old days when they were dominated by overweight men who had strange odors. I just don't understand why you're ranting about this. And if that was the one basic category of men attending them, then did you fall into that category? And if not, then how about we welcome the diversity of different people attending? How does that not make these things better? The problem is, with any convention that's unconventional, it becomes a dumping ground for all other crap that doesn't fit anywhere else. People go, oh look, people who are weird are here. I'm weird too, so I won't bother checking to see if my weirdness is compatible. I'll just dump my ass in there. So people branch out to communities and new areas of interest to relate to one another in ways that most of society doesn't understand? What's the problem with that? Now, all this could be ignored if I could just write it off on the same ticket that we give male cosplayers and sci-fi fans an active out with, namely that it's excusable because you're a nerd. Socially retarded and don't know any better because you spent all your life watching Star Trek, but that's not the case. They're not real nerds either. I think we're on the third no true Scotsman fallacy, aren't we? A few weeks back, I was at the club and some girl is going off on what a nerd she is. What were her credentials? Playing Call of Duty and Portal nonstop. That was it. I had to point out that being a gamer is not the same as being a nerd, but she just kind of looked at me as though I told her gravity was liquid and it tasted like gummy bears. Great dumbass, again missing a comma, you think playing video games makes you an intellectual elite with a taste for high-quality fantasy? It doesn't. You don't need credentials in order to consider yourself a nerd. It's not a job application, and you're not the prospective employer whose requisites need to be met before anyone's allowed to wear the title. It's a self-applied label that covers a wide span of cultural elements. Video games, TV shows, movies, card games, LARPs, Dungeons and Dragons, the list goes on. You don't have to devote your life to every single aspect of what could be considered nerd culture to consider yourself one. A chef who makes his own food at a small restaurant is still a chef. He's no less fit to wear that label than someone classically trained in French cuisine. They're just different kinds of chefs. And the club girl who loves video games is no less allowed to call herself a nerd any more than you are, just because you happen to enjoy Theodore Sturgeon books. And these people who are the low-tier nerds that you don't think are nerd-worthy, that's not limited to females. There are guys who would casually consider themselves nerds because they just love video games, or they just love science fiction, or they love anime. That's something they consider nerdy about them, and it's not just females. So let me ask you, are you bitter? Am I bitter? Absolutely, 100%. Why? Because as someone who grew up being ostracized for being a dork-ass outsider, someone who was routinely ridiculed by girls for not liking sports and trendy music, I can ID shallow bitches from a mile away, and it pisses me the hell off to see girls who most assuredly would have been treating nerd boys like lepers in middle school now capitalizing on their attention later in life because being a nerd is cool. Now you're assuming that just because some girls didn't like the nerd you were in your youth, that the tens of thousands of cosplay women on this planet must have been the same way when they were little girls. Even if they were, they're allowed to change their minds. And no, being socially rejected doesn't give you the superpower to identify someone's personality before you get to know them. Lastly, anime, I gotta say it. One thing you probably don't realize is that anime isn't a brilliant art form. You think it is because you have no frame of reference aside from flipping your shit in groups of 10 at the Sanrio store, but it's actually kinda crap in Japan. If you have ever been to Japan, you'd know that pretty much everything in that place is accented with drawings so cute they shit cartoon cats. In Japan, anime isn't really this esteemed art form. It's pulp you're celebrating, something mass-produced with very little attention to quality. It would be kind of like going to an art gallery in Canada that was filled with exclusively framed American highway signs. The point is, anime is the Coke bottle in The Gods Must Be Crazy. Something doesn't have to be popularly considered rare and glorious art in order for some people to consider it as such. Let's take that Coke, for example. It's pretty damn popular here in the US. For most people, think of it as nothing other than a soft drink. But if you brought a few cases of Coke to a community that's never been exposed to it, some may love it, some may hate it. Those who love it aren't any less allowed to appreciate it and its uniqueness just because it's a common thing where it's from. In closing, I suggest that you and everyone in your comment section who enthusiastically agrees with you drop some of those rash assumptions, hasty generalizations, and no true Scotsman fallacies. Bitterness can cloud your judgment and cause you to make fallacious, erroneous projections that fall on their face. These women you're spitting poison at are people. They're people with a fun hobby, and they aren't leeching off of you just because they happen to have some common interest with you. Treat them accordingly, and maybe some of that bitterness will fade away.